So I think, is this only the second time that these have been presented back to back in cinema?
Yes.
And the first time was last week?
Yes.
Okay. So thanks for doing that here with us.
Sorry, third time.
Third time, okay.
Third time.
All right. Good enough.
But both were last week.
Okay. I guess I'm just curious what your experience is watching them back to back, because you also just experienced that recently, right, for the first time?
Yeah, I had never watched them in their entirety together until last week at the Tate, and I'd really forgotten a lot about, especially the first one.
Yeah.
Like really worked intensely on that, and then kind of abandoned it for some years before going back to these ones.
When you made Quickeners, did you think that this was going to be a series, a trilogy?
Not at all. No.
Okay.
No.
Can you tell us how that took shape then?
It's like kind of convoluted, but they were sort of reverse engineered. The final scene in I Can See Forever was actually shot before Liminals had even begun, and before I had even shot or even knew where that film was going. So they kind of came together very, in this weird reverse engineered pattern, where I started working on I Can See Forever, not exactly knowing where it was going, and then was invited to take part in the Venice Biennale, and realized I wanted to make something a little quicker. So Liminals came there, somehow became the second film, and then I Can See Forever was like reverse engineered to fit in the beginning of it all. So they were really scattershot.
So the chronology of it actually is like if we go from Quickeners to Liminals to I Can See Forever, we go from like distant future to near future. So that's sort of like a reverse chronology in terms of the settings.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. The nearer you come to now, the nearer you go, you look, and it looks aesthetically and in media. Yeah.
Right. So is maybe we can talk a little bit about each one. Is Quickeners the only one that uses archival footage?
Yes.
Can you tell us a bit about that, the source material?
That comes from a 1967 documentary called Holy Ghost People about Pentecostal Christian snake handlers in West Virginia. And it's a verite film, really fly on the wall, that just documents their service, basically. And it's something I'd seen years ago, I think, in art school, and was really enamored with, and had found an original copy. So I had holding that material for years before I actually started to work with it. Right.
I'm curious about something that is you notice in all three is this combination of these speculative future scenarios with like archaic media forms and technologies. And can you talk? That's like a pretty interesting sort of seemingly incongruous sort of a combination. I'm just wondering if you can talk about why that's interesting to you, because besides the content and the interest, your obvious interest in like altered states and transcendental experience, there also seems to be a real interest in the language of documentary in your work.
Yeah, I think it evolved out of I work as a visual artist generally, so I've been working using outmoded media in a way to sort of disarm a viewer, in a way to set up parameters that you feel that you know and that you're aware of. And so there's an element of comfort, I think, when you see 16mm or VHS, that you don't feel you're going to be surprised by these forms. You feel like it's historically sort of there. It's recorded. It's there. So they were a way for me to sort of subvert that. I think, to take this form that I felt familiar and comfortable with, and then sort of twist it. I don't know if that answers your question exactly, but that was the initial sort of allure to using the outmoded technology. And yeah, I guess just this sort of notion of cognitive dissonance of watching something that you feel like you understand completely. You're not going to be surprised by it, but then being told it's something completely the opposite of that, and you are being surprised by it. So that's where it came from.
They're very like kind of sort of uncannily like I think precise like simulations of a particular style of documentary. from like, I don't know, 1960s and 70s television documentary, maybe. I don't know if that's what you were
The first two, definitely.
Yeah.
And then the newest one, I think, is real 90s kind of
Right.
American verite sort of style.
Are these forms that you studied, absorbed in some way? That because they're you know.
I don't know. I mean, I guess
Yeah.
like at school I saw some. You know, I studied art, but
Mhm.
yeah. I mean, I watch a lot of documentary. My research around altered states, takes me through various religious and cultural, scientific documentaries, and I don't necessarily think it's something I'm like have a crazy affinity to. But yeah, it certainly worked for the themes, the ability to kind of create these worlds where I could, using documentary format, create this sort of sci-fi element where I could introduce all these things I'm interested in that revolve around altered states, religion and belief systems and science, and flatten them, and keep them on this really kind of non-hierarchical level. So I guess that's the documentary element that I'm attracted to, is that the notion of belief, the suspension of disbelief that you can create by faking a documentary.
I mean, it's interesting because if you define a documentary, it's basically a film that claims to be true, or like
Sure, yeah.
I mean, it's sort of something that makes a truth claim, and then I guess belief and faith is something that's sort of something that you're exploring thematically as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And the fraught sort of explanations or definitions of what is belief and what is faith, and where do they lie within science, within religion, within hedonism, etc.
So can you just actually take me back to like your discovery of Holy Ghost People? I'm curious to hear more about that film, how you responded to it, and how you decided to repurpose it. It sounds like something you discovered a long time ago, and then it stayed.
Yeah, I can't even tell you when exactly. I'm pretty sure it was in a second year, film studies class or something, where we watched it, and probably amongst all the hits, of that. I don't necessarily know how it happened, except that I had the material. My work before that, up until this point, had been often a little more immersive and a little more installation-based, and you would have walked in on the climax of that, and that would have been it. It would have been a room with people dancing and music, etc. And with that piece, it was the first time I really kind of set out on a narrative to make a narrative structure, I guess. And so that, I don't know if that answers anything, but
yeah, it does. Can you say a bit about how this, just to maybe give context to people who may not know your other work, how this interest in transcendence and altered states is it's a thread that's run through all your work, and it's something you've explored in different forms.
Yeah, I mean, my work revolves around altered states, basically, and sort of from the cultural attempts to achieve them to the scientific attempts to map and translate them. So the gamut of what could end up being, related to altered states. So that takes me into all sorts of interesting areas, I think. But yeah, it comes back to belief and to faith a lot of the time, I think. And these films, I think, are a great example of, smashing them all together in this kind of alchemical way, where I'm not privileging one over the other, or attempting not to, to privilege the scientific over the religious, or
right.
etc.
I'm just going to ask one more, and then we can take some audience questions. It's the other thing that struck me just watching them back to back today is also how the language, you're using the literal language of documentary in terms of these have very how voiceover heavy it is, and how like this sort of authoritative documentary voice of God style also really works with the fact that all of them kind of have the same form, in that they all end up with these long passages that where you really are capturing an experience beyond language, where the words drop out or are drowned out, as in the case of Quickeners. So I'm curious about I guess the climactic moments of all of them. Is that something that comes to you first as you're conceptualizing the piece, or do you?
Yeah, I mean, I make them to get there, basically. Like that's what I want to see, is that part. That's what I want to witness, and that's what I want to, really attempt to sort of elicit a similar response
Mm-hmm.
from the viewer that's appearing on screen, basically. So they do it, sort of get reverse engineered to make it there. You know, a lot of the time that element seems to come naturally to me, or has just been a part of my practice for many years. Documenting people having some type of altered experience, you know,
Mm-hmm.
slowing it down, manipulating it, you know, using all sorts of cliche devices to sort of amplify this. So yeah, those moments are really what I'm after, I
Right.
think. And then it takes this sort of, I don't know, it's like a payoff, I guess, for
Mhm.
putting up with the first 20 minutes.
Okay, we'll take some questions. And yeah, I think we have a microphone coming to you.
Yeah, I'm wondering sort of what you think, Jeremy, about, you know, in the thread of these seem to be sort of this lamentation at like the death of spirituality in society at the hands of technology. And there's a line in the last one where I think he says like, virtuosity is my meditation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, do you personally, are you trying to make a statement to sort of like disclaim, like this warning that you're trying to make, or do you think there is some sort of like golden, maybe a silver lining for these like intersection between technology and spirituality that could be like a brighter future?
They're really just propositions, you know. They're just kind of like quite messy propositions, I think, in a lot of ways. But I think I keep my own opinion out of it a lot of the time. Potentially, but I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if there's. I think there's still, you know, there's still hope for everything, really. Yeah, I don't really have an answer. That's too strong of a question.
Yep.
This may be a weaker version.
I hope so.
There seems to be a great deal of love, I would say, for science, in the sense, at least, that the scientist guy in the last one was very finely drawn. That was a real scientist person, and believed that it could be, science could be helpful, and if only we would explore it more, and so on. So, what about that?
What about my love of science?
Well,
Or-
yeah, science is it or is it not necessarily the villain in killing spirituality?
I don't think it's necessarily the villain. I think that they're like, you know, they're kind of the antithesis and brothers at the same time. He is finally drawn because he's a real neuroscientist, and he was basically speaking real science, but throwing in, you know, some of my own terms in there. No, I don't think science is responsible for the death of spirituality. I think you know, humanism and sort of the self and the 20th century centering on the ego is more responsible for the death of spirituality, really, than science, so to speak. But I mean, is there a question, or is it just to comment on it? Like, is there a specific? Yeah, I don't know. I love both. I love spirituality. I love science. So these are really, I'm enamored with both. I'm enamored with the language and with people who believe. I'm really drawn to people's belief, basically, and how far they will go to prove this belief. You know, how far the snake handlers in West Virginia will risk death to prove how much they believe in God, and how far science will go to, you know, prove that God doesn't exist, or that they can tell you what's happening in your brain while you're having one of these experiences. Yeah.
Yep.
Hi, thanks for that. That earlier comment, at first, of course, I didn't realize that, having watched the first film, and knowing that it was documentary footage, and not knowing that the second and the third were not, I couldn't really distinguish that they weren't. So to the question of I guess my question is, how can you shed some light, a bit of light on your process of how you created something very convincing, I guess. I really felt like I was glimpsing some alternative reality, or some alternative future. How did you think about creating
Just with
that?
a really good team, I think. My cameraman, Derek Howard, is here, DOP, who shot those last two and has an incredible ability to imitate what we were, the films we were looking at, like you were saying, as influence, etc., as well as, costuming and the actors, and then the technical process itself, I think, is what's key, is that everything is on 60 millimeter, and that, and been played to gain patina, etc. I Can See Forever is dumped to VHS completely, the sound to VHS, etc. So I think it's really in that transition that, like, it just becomes, to me at least, it becomes believable. If you add some type of plug-in or something these days, it's really, I think it's super transparent. But you go back to celluloid, and I don't know, it just adds some serious weight to the material. So yeah, it was a matter of being quite specific, and being quite careful with the details. But I think the translation to that authentic media is where the real belief sort of kicks in, or the real, to me.
Do you direct your actors much? Or did you give them reference materials? Or?
Excuse me. With with Liminals, we kind of held it like a workshop for a few days, and then shot it like a documentary. So they were doing these things, being directed only insofar as they had learned how to do them, etc. But not a lot of direction. No, shooting a lot. I mean, the scenes in I Can See Forever had been set up, but there was no real script to it, etc. Just directed. Sorry.
Yeah, okay, we have 3 here, so let's start. Well, actually, we'll start at the back and then work our way down.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you so much. I was curious, when you were studying these altered states, are you interested in exploring them as well? As you had the footage of the Brian Geisen Dream Machine. I mean, had you actually experienced that? And you had some stuff with the Whirling Dervish, which wasn't identified as Whirling Dervish, but all these different transcendental states or something. Are you interested just in the study of the phenomena of it, or are you actually experiencing them? And what is your reference with a indebtedness to Sam Delaney when you were talking about him?
Well, yeah, I've extensively researched them personally, especially when I was younger. I don't so much anymore, beyond meditation and the odd night out, but I did all sorts of research. The early work by me was really concerned with psychedelia. I did a piece in 2003 called DMT, where I gave 30 different people the drug DMT and recorded the reaction to it. So, as well as, yeah, I mean, I was raised Catholic until I was 13, etc. So there's a lot of, I've had a lot of experience personally. My relationship to Delaney is simply from reading his books and being a big fan. But that was just simply coining using his coining of the term paraspace, really. It was just a reference. But I'm a fan, definitely. And Dream Machine, yeah, I've used a Dream Machine as well as a new contemporary version of one I've tried. So yeah, I've tried as much as I can, basically, within my parameters.
Yep.
Why are there no credits except for who gave you the money?
Because these are generally shown in a gallery context or a museum context, and so they loop. They're generally made as seamless loops. So the first one doesn't, but it would simply not have any credit at all. The second and third loop really precisely, so they're constantly playing in a museum. I don't make films necessarily with the cinema in mind, but when bringing them into a place like this, it needs to be noted who paid for them. I think generally, I think that goes with the territory. But as far as credits, I don't know. I never really considered, just because they're never there. I think in the gallery, I never thought of I don't know, keep that suspension of disbelief as long as I can, I guess.
And when these are installed in gallery, you often show them alongside other works. Can you maybe talk a bit about that?
Yeah, they oftentimes are accompanied by photo works that I do using found photos of people taken from newspaper archives of people having some type of transcendental or altered experience, religious, drug, technological, whatever. So it's generally these black and white photos I've sourced from newspaper archives, and then I make big acrylic prisms that go in front of them that focus on the person, and generally the part of the body, generally their face, but where the catharsis seems to be happening. So they create these really sort of cliche psychedelic fractal images around these documentary photos. So they're like a physical manifestation, I think, of these works. So they're often shown with that, and these works are usually in their own specific room. The last one that you saw, I Can See Forever, that really kind of cliche vortex that appears at the end, that ends up coming from a second projector, and so it floods the entire wall. So the film would go 4:3, 16:9, and then the entire space would be filled with that vortex. So that's one thing missing when you see it in this screening environment.
All right. We have, I think, one here. Sorry. Okay. All right, we have two here, actually. So if you want to end.
I just wanted to ask if you would talk a bit about the sort of slurred, backwards something speech that almost everybody speaks in, because it's not complete, because you can hear some of the words and at first when you're watching it, you don't know, like, is there something going on, or is there something wrong with me? So could you talk a little bit about that choice and also how you achieve that?
Well, it was like a means to an end. You know, I wanted to work with that material. I wanted to work with that found footage, but I didn't want them to be saying what they were saying. I wanted to create my own story. So we had to figure out a way to make them not be speaking English anymore, and we went through many tests of how to do it, but everything just sounded fake, sounded like an effect, etc. And so my friend came to this conclusion, which I can't really tell you what we do, but it's a way of, you know, it's still their voice, it's still coming from what they have said, but it's a way to manipulate it so that it's not making sense anymore, unless it does make sense. You know, I study them really closely so that sometimes I can line up the words just to elicit a response like you had, you know, where you think, oh, I don't get it, but then something does line up, and I was super happy with how the results, you know, this cognitive dissonance of thinking you understand it but totally not understanding it, and so carried it into the second and third film basically as a way to I don't know, just further this confusion that goes in the films.
Okay, we can take a couple more quick ones. Sure. Yep, and then.
Thank you. That was wonderful. I just wanted to follow up a little on this question that Dennis had asked about the association of the particular media with sort of certain times, right? I mean, the 16 millimeter, the videotape, and then we move into the space of the kind of like very contemporary aesthetic with the glitch art and the digital at the end. And I'm just wondering how you're considering that in relation to the kind of this transcendent, the times that you're looking at.
Yeah, I guess it was just like as extreme of a break as I could possibly get was really it. And like, you know, there's a lot of I personally love being surprised by films and being manipulated. I think you can feel that in these. Like, I really enjoy that. I like being twisted by something and being duped, and so those were just an attempt to see how far I could really push that and how far you could go from something that felt totally antiquated into something that felt, you know, really progressive, I think, in a sense. As well, I was just that data moshing, where that the sort of core of that is just a glitch. You know, it's a mistake. It's something you see on the internet when you're not getting your bandwidth fast enough. And I find that to be some of the most psychedelic imagery I've ever seen, as far as an illustration of. I think psychedelic illustration is often so fraught with the problem of not being able to illustrate it, and so I just wanted to amplify that and see if I could make something that really was trippy, I guess.
Okay, last question.
Hi, thanks for that. I had an ethics question. So, as a historical sociologist, I work a lot with found objects as well, within or outside of archives. So I was wondering how you thought about working with found archive of people who might be dead but might still be alive in parts, and altering the image and the message. And a follow-up question to that is, so in the third film, I was wondering if your casting of a black person was deliberate, to sort of poke at America's heritage of medical experimentation on non-white populations?
No, the reason that he was cast is because of his dancing ability. He's someone that I was following. I saw him dance with Tino Segal, another artist, at one point, and I think he's one of the best dancers I've ever seen in my life. He totally hypnotizes me. So that story was written, again, reverse engineered to fit within, somehow making him this character, that his dancing has this ability to lead him to a sort of parallel space of some sort. Ethical questions. No, I don't. I mean, I don't have an issue with it. I could understand why someone might, but I think that no. I mean, the film is in public domain, and therefore, it's been 50 years since it had any copyright on it, and yeah, I guess that's just my stance on it. Is I believe in the reappropriation of imagery and of message, etc. So, no.
We have to end it there. But Jeremy, thanks a lot for being here.
My pleasure.